The wind howled over the empty fields, sweeping across the golden grass like waves in an ocean. Thomas Harper tightened his coat around his shoulders as he trudged along the edge of the pasture, his boots sinking into the damp earth. It was early April, and the spring storms had been particularly brutal this year. The air was heavy with the promise of more rain, and dark clouds loomed low over the horizon. Thomas was a solitary man by nature. He had moved to the countryside 5 years ago, tired of city life and its endless noise. His small farm, nestled in the foothills of a forgotten valley, gave him a sense of peace he had never known before. Each morning began with the crowing of roosters and the lowing of his 2 cows. But today was different. The storm had started the night before, and the wind had woken him up in the middle of the night. It was stronger than usual, shaking the windows of his farmhouse and moaning through the trees like a wounded animal. He had barely slept. At first light, he had gone out to check on his animals and make sure nothing was damaged. That's when he heard it. A cry, faint, high-pitched, and desperate. He froze in place. It wasn't the sound of any of his livestock. It came again, just over the hill beyond the barn. Thomas dropped the feed bucket and began to run. The cry grew louder as he reached the crest of the hill. There, in the muddy clearing at the base of the slope, was a foal, tiny, trembling, and soaked to the bone. Its legs were folded awkwardly beneath it, its flanks rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. No sign of the mother. Thomas approached slowly, hands out, voice low and steady. "Easy now. You're all right. I'm not going to hurt you." The foal flinched at his voice, but didn't try to run. It couldn't. Thomas could see now that one of its legs was twisted unnaturally, likely broken. Its coat was coated with mud and rain, and its eyes, wide and dark, were filled with confusion and fear. He knelt beside it, checking for other injuries. It was cold, too cold. Without intervention, it wouldn't survive another night. He glanced back toward his house. It was nearly a mile uphill, and the foal couldn't walk. He'd have to carry it. Thomas stood, wiped his hands on his coat, and looked around. No other horses. No tracks. It must have wandered from one of the neighboring ranches, but most of those were several miles away. The foal was a mystery and a responsibility now. He ran back to the house, grabbed 2 heavy wool blankets, a tarp, and a length of rope. He also filled a thermos with warm water and grabbed an old canvas duffel. When he returned, the foal was still there, shivering harder now. He laid the blankets out, gently rolled the foal onto the tarp, and wrapped it tightly. It whimpered as he lifted it, but didn't struggle. Thomas was strong from years of farm work, but the foal was heavier than it looked. He slung the duffel over his shoulder, hoisted the wrapped bundle into his arms, and began the long climb home. The wind fought him every step of the way. Twice he had to stop and rest, his breath ragged, legs shaking. But finally, he reached the house. He brought the foal inside and set it down near the fireplace, which he stoked into a roaring blaze. He unwrapped the blankets and began drying its coat with towels. The foal's breathing slowed, and its eyes fluttered shut. Thomas stayed beside it, feeding it warm water with a sponge and whispering quiet reassurances. The storm raged on outside, but inside the farmhouse, the warmth began to return. He didn't sleep that night. Not really. He watched the foal, listened to the wind, and wondered where it had come from, and what he would do now. The morning brought no sunlight, only a dull gray haze hanging over the hills. Rain still pelted the roof of the farmhouse in intermittent bursts, and the wind had dropped to a tired sigh. Inside, Thomas sat on the floor beside the fireplace, his back against the wall, the foal still wrapped in layers of blankets before him. Its chest rose and fell slowly now, steadier than the night before. He watched every breath. Thomas had fed it warm water again just before dawn, mixed with a bit of honey for energy. The foal had swallowed weakly, but that small act gave him hope. It was far from out of danger, especially with that leg, but it was alive, and that mattered. He finally rose and made himself a quick breakfast of eggs and toast, eating in silence while his eyes flicked constantly to the bundle by the fire. Afterward, he made the first of many phone calls. The local vet, Dr. Ellen Wright, was a no-nonsense woman who had tended to his animals in the past. She agreed to come by that afternoon, once the road conditions improved. In the meantime, she gave him instructions on how to stabilize the leg. Thomas listened carefully, wrote everything down, and thanked her. He retrieved a first aid kit from the barn and returned to the house. Kneeling beside the foal again, he carefully examined the leg. Swollen, definitely fractured. He cut a length of soft cloth and gently wrapped it, then made a splint from 2 thin boards and bound it in place. The foal winced, but didn't cry out. Thomas spoke softly, more to calm himself than the foal. "Hang in there, little one. Help's on the way." By midday, the weather began to clear. The clouds parted enough to let weak sunlight filter through, and the valley glistened wet and clean. The foal stirred, blinking open its eyes. It looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Thomas felt something shift. There was a connection now, fragile but undeniable. He reached out and stroked its neck. The foal didn't flinch. Dr. Wright arrived around 2 in the afternoon, pulling her pickup truck up the gravel path. Thomas met her at the door and led her inside. She knelt beside the foal, inspecting the leg and taking its temperature. She nodded in approval. "You did well. Stabilized it just right. Will it heal?" Thomas asked. "It will with care. You'll need to keep it off that leg for a while. And it needs food. Real food, not just water and honey. I've got milk replacer in the barn. Used it for calves before." "Good. Mix it warm. Feed small amounts every few hours. We'll keep an eye on infection, but for now, it's just rest and time." She gave the foal a mild sedative to help it sleep and left Thomas with instructions and a supply of medications. Before leaving, she asked the question that had been lingering since the night before. "You think it belongs to anyone nearby?" "I don't know," Thomas said. "No brands. No halter. No tracks. Well, I'll ask around. But it might be wild." "Wild?" She nodded. "It happens. Sometimes a wild mare strays down from the ridges. Foals too weak to keep up get left behind." Thomas looked at the foal again. Alone, injured, abandoned by nature's cold logic. He felt a flare of anger, quickly replaced by determination. Well, not this one. That night, Thomas moved the foal to a makeshift stall in the old milking shed behind his house. He lined the floor with straw and kept a space heater running. He slept in the shed with it, wrapped in a blanket, one hand resting on its side. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, the foal was safe. The next morning broke bright and cold. Sunlight spilled across the barn floor through the open slats in the wooden walls, painting golden lines over the straw. Thomas stirred from his makeshift bed beside the foal and blinked blearily at the light. His body ached from the hard floor, but the moment he saw the foal still breathing, eyes half open, he felt a surge of relief. He fed it carefully, half a bottle of warmed milk replacer, and cleaned its mouth with a damp rag. The foal drank more eagerly today, a subtle but important sign. It was stronger, slightly, and even shifted its weight to adjust its body on the straw. The leg, still bound in the splint, remained motionless. That would take weeks to heal, and Thomas knew the risk of infection was still high. Throughout the day, he kept a schedule. Feedings every 4 hours, a gentle sponge bath in the afternoon, and always monitoring for signs of fever or distress. He documented everything in a small notebook: times, quantities, temperature, behavior. It reminded him of when his younger sister had been sick back when they were kids. bedridden with pneumonia for weeks. Their parents had long hours at work, so Thomas had taken care of her. He'd forgotten what that felt like, this total responsibility for another life. That afternoon, he walked the perimeter of his property, hoping to find any sign of a mare, or hoof prints, or anything that might explain where the foal had come from. Nothing. No signs. Just wind-bent grass, and a few broken branches near the hill. Returning to the shed, he sat with the foal again. It lifted its head slightly at his presence. He smiled, placing a hand gently on its neck. "I guess you're mine now," he said quietly. He spent that evening building a more permanent stall inside the shed. He reinforced the walls, added more straw, and installed a small gate. The foal watched him work with those wide, dark eyes, occasionally twitching an ear at the sound of the hammer. Dr. Wright called that night. "How's the patient?" "Eating well," Thomas said. "No fever. Seems a little more alert." "Good. Keep it warm and keep the wound clean. I'll be by in 2 days." After the call, Thomas returned to the stall and sat beside the foal. He noticed it was watching him more closely now, reacting when he moved or spoke. Bonding was happening slowly. He decided it was time for a name. "You need something to be called, don't you?" he mused aloud. He considered for a while, then said, "How about Chance? Since that's what this all feels like." The foal didn't respond, of course, but Thomas smiled anyway. "Chance it is." Over the next few days, Chance's recovery continued at a measured pace. The feeding became routine, and the foal began making soft noises when Thomas approached. Small, tentative whinnies that sounded more like curiosity than pain. Thomas stayed close. He rarely left the property, only venturing out for supplies or to check his livestock. His days revolved around the foal, and he found himself talking aloud more than he ever had before. Stories, memories, casual conversation, it didn't matter. The sound of his voice seemed to calm Chance, and maybe it calmed him too. On the 6th day, Chance stood. Thomas had just returned with fresh towels when he saw the foal wobbling on 3 legs, its broken limb held stiffly above the ground. It took one uncertain step, then collapsed back into the straw, but had tried. He knelt beside it, amazed. "You're a fighter." That night, as the stars blinked awake over the valley and the air turned crisp, Thomas stayed outside the stall longer than usual. He watched Chance sleep, chest rising and falling steadily. There was a long road ahead, healing, training, figuring out what to do when the leg healed. But for the first time, he felt something more than survival. He felt hope. Chance tried again the next morning. Thomas had just finished sweeping the shed floor and was setting down the feed bucket when he heard a soft grunt. Turning quickly, he saw the foal push itself upright on 3 legs, wobbly, shaking, but standing. This time it didn't fall. Thomas didn't speak. He knelt slowly, watching, holding his breath. Chance took a step, another, each one hesitant, supported mostly by the good front and rear legs. The broken one stayed lifted but no longer completely limp. Muscles were returning. Confidence, too. He stepped forward and gently pressed a hand to the foal's shoulder. "Good boy," he whispered. "You're doing it." Over the following week, Chance's progress quickened. He stood longer, walked more, even attempted a few playful hops before the effort overwhelmed him. The splint stayed on, but Dr. Wright was pleased during her next visit. Healing clean. Might even avoid a limp if things stay this course. Thomas nodded, grateful. He kept up the regimen, feedings, short walks inside the shed, massages to prevent stiffness in the muscles. His farm work piled up a bit, but he didn't care. He worked in early morning or after dark, fitting everything around Chance's needs. One afternoon, he decided it was time for sunlight. He opened the shed doors wide and carried Chance, just beyond the threshold, into the fenced yard beside the barn. The foal blinked at the sudden brightness, ear swiveling to every sound. Birds, wind, the creak of the fence. It was a new world. He set Chance down gently and stayed beside him. The foal hesitated, then took a slow, trembling step onto the grass. Its nostrils flared, taking in the scent of earth and green things. Then another step, and another. For 10 whole minutes, Chance explored the small space, walking in cautious circles, his head raised high, tail flicking gently, eyes wide but not panicked. Thomas watched from a few feet away, heart full. They did it again the next day, and the next. Each time, Thomas let Chance stay out longer. He was careful not to overdo it. He timed every session, checked the leg afterward for swelling or heat. But Chance adapted quickly. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge, Thomas brought out a grooming brush. He started gently, brushing Chance's neck, back, and sides. The foal tensed at first, but quickly relaxed into the rhythm. It became part of the ritual, feeding, walking, brushing. Each act stitched them closer together. Still, Thomas knew he needed a longer-term plan. Once the leg healed, Chance would need more than space to walk. He'd need room to run, socialization, possibly training. Thomas had never raised a horse before. He began researching. Books, forums. He even visited the nearest rancher, a stoic man named Clyde, who kept a herd of 20 horses. Clyde listened carefully. Sounds like you've got yourself a good one. Broken leg like that, and it still made it? Not many do. He's tough, Thomas agreed. But I've never done this before. Then learn fast, Clyde said, not unkindly. Horses don't wait. But if you've kept him alive this long, you're doing something right. Thomas left with a stack of advice, a loaned halter, and a referral to a woman named Ava who trained rescue horses. He gave her a call. Bring him by when he's strong enough, she said. I'll help you figure out next steps. Back home, he looked at Chance, now bigger, stronger, still favoring the injured leg, but clearly no longer fragile. The foal raised its head at the sound of Thomas's boots and trotted a few steps to the fence line, clumsy but full of energy. We've come this far, Thomas said. Let's see how far we can go. That night, he sat on the porch, watching the stars again. The valley was quiet, peaceful. Chance was resting in the shed, curled in fresh straw, safe and healing. And Thomas, once content in solitude, now couldn't imagine a day without that sound of hooves shifting in straw. 2 weeks later, Thomas removed the splint. He'd waited until Dr. Wright gave the go-ahead. The bones had aligned well, and the foal's strength was returning daily. Chance had outgrown his first makeshift stall and now lived in a larger enclosure, straw-bedded with clean wood panels and open views of the pasture. With slow hands, Thomas unwrapped the final layer of gauze. The leg, though thinner from disuse, looked straight and solid. Chance shifted uncomfortably as the support came off, but didn't panic. Thomas touched the limb gently. Warm, but not hot. Good circulation. You're free again, kid, he said softly. Chance tried to walk. His first steps were halting, uncertain. But no collapse. No yelp of pain. Thomas followed close, ready to intervene. But he didn't have to. The foal found his balance within minutes, carefully adjusting to the freedom. Thomas spent the next few days supervising Chance constantly. There were stumbles, a few moments of overconfidence, followed by graceless landings, but no serious setbacks. The leg was stiff but healing. By the weekend, Chance was moving well enough to explore outside the pen. Thomas led him out into the pasture just past dawn, early enough that the grass still glittered with dew. Chance stepped cautiously at first, then with more certainty. He trotted. Then, suddenly, he kicked off into a sprint, awkward, 3-legged, then 4. The healed leg held. Thomas stood still, watching the foal run full tilt through the grass, tail high. Something stirred in him. Pride, sure, but also something more difficult to name. An ache, like watching a child take flight. That evening, Thomas sat with a notepad. He listed everything Ava might ask about. Feeding schedule, injury history, behavior notes. He noted Chance's temperament, alert, trusting, a little mischievous now that the pain was gone. He made an appointment with Ava for the coming Tuesday. The drive to Ava's ranch was slow and careful. Thomas had borrowed a trailer from Clyde and loaded Chance, using a technique Ava described over the phone. It took patience and treats, but the foal eventually stepped inside. Ava met them at the gate. She was in her late 40s, sun-browned, and calm as stone. She led Thomas to a smaller paddock where they could release Chance. She watched carefully as Chance exited the trailer, sniffed the ground, and then took a few hesitant steps. Nice conformation, she noted. He favors the leg slightly, but that should ease up. He's got spirit. They talked for an hour. She asked detailed questions, observed the foal's gait, had her assistant check the healing bone with experienced fingers. You did well, she finally said. Very well. He's got a good chance now. Thomas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. She offered to begin groundwork training in 2 weeks. Just gentle exposure, haltering, leading, building trust. We'll take it slow. No pressure. He's young yet. Thomas agreed. For now, Chance would return home, but Ava would visit once a week, help Thomas prepare for full integration into the ranching life, or whatever path the foal might take. Driving back, Thomas kept checking the rearview mirror. Chance stood steady, ears forward, watching the road ahead. That night, back at the farm, Thomas opened the gate and let Chance back into his paddock. The foal hesitated at first, then walked through on his own. Thomas leaned against the fence and whispered, "You're not just surviving anymore. You're living." For the first time since the storm, the valley felt different. Not just healed, but changed. The next few weeks brought a rhythm Thomas hadn't expected, but welcomed. Every morning began with feedings and checkups. Chance's leg improved steadily, the limp softening, muscles firming beneath his coat. He was growing fast, more than Thomas anticipated. His back reached higher, his strides longer, the mischief in his eyes clearer with each passing day. Ava's visits were a lifeline. She arrived every Friday, pulling up in her old pickup, boots already dusted from the morning's work elsewhere. She wasted no time with pleasantries. She walked the paddock, observed Chance's gait, adjusted Thomas's training exercises, and left clear, direct feedback. "No babying," she said one afternoon after watching Thomas hesitate to correct a nipping attempt. "He's not a dog. He's learning what's allowed. Be firm, be fair." Thomas nodded. He learned quickly. By the second week, he was haltering Chance with ease. By the third, the foal followed voice commands for simple movements. Step forward, back up, hold still. More importantly, they were bonding. Real bonding. Chance whinnied when he saw Thomas approach. He pressed his head against Thomas's shoulder when he rested beside him in the evening. There was trust in the foal's eyes now, full and constant. Still, there were challenges. One morning, Thomas arrived to find Chance agitated, pawing the ground, snorting, ears pinned. Something had spooked him overnight. A coyote, maybe, or a storm in the distance. It took nearly 30 minutes to calm him. Afterward, Thomas sat beside him, fingers brushing the soft patch between Chance's eyes. "You're safe," he murmured. "Nothing's gonna hurt you now." The trust held. Later that week, Ava introduced a new exercise, desensitization. She brought a tarp, rattling plastic bags, and a small flag on a stick. Chance balked at first, snorting at the flapping plastic, eyes wide. But Thomas stood steady. He didn't flinch. And after a while, neither did Chance. It's about leadership, Ava explained. He'll trust you if you show him nothing will break you. Thomas took that to heart. Every interaction became a lesson in calm authority. He read books by flashlight late into the night. He replayed Ava's instructions over and over. He asked questions, dozens of them. Ava answered most, and what she didn't, she pointed him toward. By the end of the month, Chance was leading well, accepting touch everywhere, standing calmly for grooming, and tolerating noises that once sent him skittering. You've built a foundation, Ava said after one particularly smooth session. This is the part that makes everything else possible. Thomas felt that truth settle deep. Every moment they'd spent since the storm led to this, mutual understanding, mutual growth. That night, he walked the pasture as dusk fell, watching Chance trot at the far end of the fence, silhouetted against the fading sky. The foal stopped, turned, and galloped toward him. Thomas laughed as Chance skidded to a halt inches away, breath warm against his chest. "You're ready," he whispered. "More ready than either of us thought you'd be." But as he said it, a quiet question stirred. Ready for what? Thomas woke before dawn to a message from Ava. "Working a rescue near the ridge. Can't make it this week. Let me know if anything urgent comes up." He stared at the screen for a while, thumb hovering over the reply button. Then he set it down and poured himself coffee. Chance was already waiting by the gate when Thomas stepped outside. His ears perked, nostrils flared, tail flicking with contained energy. The foal had grown nearly a hand taller in the last 2 weeks. The once sickly frame had filled in with muscle and movement. Thomas clipped on the halter and led him toward the pasture. The morning was cool, sunlight just beginning to bleed through the trees. They walked in silence, the only sounds the soft thuds of hooves on grass and the occasional rustle of a waking bird. In the center of the field, Thomas stopped. Today, he thought, they'd try something more. He unclipped the lead and stepped back. Chance looked at him, confused. "Go on," Thomas said. The foal didn't move. Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out a long lead line he'd looped into a lunge rope. He flicked the end gently, and Chance stepped forward, then broke into a light trot. The circle widened. Thomas kept his feet planted, rotating in place. It wasn't elegant. Chance tripped once, then again, but he kept going. When Thomas gave the signal to stop, Chance obeyed, turning toward him, breathing hard, eyes bright. He was ready for more. Thomas built an obstacle course over the next few days, using what he had: barrels, logs, cones. Nothing complicated. Just a few things to challenge the foal's focus and coordination. Each morning, they trained. Ava's voice echoed in Thomas's mind. Reward effort. Correct behavior. Never punish confusion. Chance learned fast. He weaved through cones, stepped over logs, backed through tight spaces. Thomas worked with him until both were sweaty and satisfied. Then came the day the gate latch failed. It was early evening. Thomas had just finished brushing Chance down when a sharp metallic click snapped the silence. The gate swung open in the wind. Chance saw it before Thomas. The foal bolted. Thomas shouted, dropping the brush. He leapt forward, but Chance was already through, hooves hammering across the open field. The road lay beyond the pasture. Thomas ran. He didn't think, just moved, dodging through the gate, hard hammering. Chance was fast, far faster than he'd ever run in training. Panic had made him reckless. But just before the ditch that bordered the road, Chance skidded to a halt. Thomas stopped short, gasping. The foal stood trembling, eyes locked on the blacktop. A passing truck roared by, its wind whipping Chance's mane. He took one step back, then another. Thomas didn't speak. He walked slowly forward, hands low, non-threatening. Chance didn't bolt. When Thomas reached him, he pressed a hand to the foal's chest. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm here." They stood like that for a minute, then turned and walked home together. Back at the barn, Thomas fixed the gate, reinforced it with wire. He didn't sleep well that night. But in the morning, Chance was waiting at the fence like always, ready to train. Later that week, Ava returned. "You look tired," she said, inspecting Chance's legs. "We had a moment," Thomas admitted, recounting the gate incident. Ava listened without interruption. Then she said, "And he came back to you?" "Yeah. Then you've passed your first real test." Thomas looked out at the pasture, where Chance now galloped in circles around the barrels. "He's not just a survivor anymore." "No," Ava said. "He's a partner." The morning started the way most did: coffee, chores, and Chance pacing by the gate. But this time, Thomas had something new in mind. Something Ava had hinted at last week: give the foal space to lead. He entered the paddock with no halter, no rope, just a small bag of oats in one hand and a leather glove tucked into his back pocket. Chance watched him, curious but calm. The routine had changed. Thomas stood still. The foal approached, head high, steps careful. He sniffed the bag, snorted, and waited. "Today," Thomas said quietly, "you choose." He turned and walked away. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then hooves crunched behind him. Chance followed. They didn't train. They wandered. Through the north pasture, around the big oak tree near the stream, down the slope trail to the training ring. Chance stayed close, sometimes brushing Thomas's elbow with his nose. Not tethered, not commanded, just present. Thomas didn't speak much, only offered a palm now and then, which Chance nuzzled. At the stream, the foal dipped his muzzle, drinking greedily. When he looked up, water glistening on his whiskers, Thomas smiled. They circled back slowly. As they reached the fence, Ava's truck rolled in. She stepped out and raised a brow at the sight. "You let him free?" Thomas nodded. He followed, all the way. Ava leaned against the post and watched Chance trot past them. "That's a bigger step than you think." Later that day, Ava introduced the next phase: loading into a trailer. It didn't go well at first. Chance balked at the ramp, ears flat, tail whipping. The confined space spooked him. Thomas tried coaxing, then redirecting, but every time they neared the entrance, Chance veered away. "Stop," Ava said. "Not today." Thomas wiped his brow. He hates it. He fears it. There's a difference. That evening, Thomas parked the trailer closer to the barn and left it open. Every day for the next week, he walked Chance near it, through it, around it. No ropes, no pressure, just proximity. By the 6th day, Chance stepped inside on his own. Thomas barely breathed. He didn't reward with food, just stood beside him, hand resting gently on the foal's shoulder. Calm, grounded, trusted. They didn't shut the door. Not yet. Later, over dinner, Thomas looked out at the barn. "He's not just learning to obey," he said aloud. "He's learning to decide." That night, a storm rolled in. Heavy wind, sharp rain, thunder. Thomas went to check on Chance and found him calm, standing in the shelter without pacing. Lightning flashed. The foal flinched, but didn't bolt. Thomas stepped inside, drenched. Chance nudged him gently. "You're okay," Thomas said. "We both are." In the morning, the pasture was slick with mud, trees dripping. But the air was clear. A fresh kind of quiet hung over the farm. Chance galloped through the wet grass, his body strong and sure. He stopped atop a small rise, looking out, then back toward Thomas. In that moment, Thomas understood. They were no longer training. They were becoming. Thomas watched from the porch, a feeling of quiet pride swelling in his chest. Chance was out in the pasture, trotting along the fence line, his tail high, his steps fluid and graceful. The foal had come so far, from a fragile creature, unsure of himself, to this strong, confident being who now had his own ideas and the courage to follow them. It was time for something new, something bigger. Thomas knew that it was time for the next big challenge, one that would test not just Chance's physical abilities, but his mental strength and trust in Thomas as a partner. He walked toward the barn, calling softly to the foal. "Come on, Chance." The foal paused, turned, and trotted toward him. There was a moment of hesitation, just a flash of doubt in his eyes. Thomas held his breath. He could see the wheels turning in Chance's head, a quiet battle of instincts and trust. Then, as if the decision was made, Chance broke into a canter and reached him, sliding to a halt right at Thomas's feet. "Good boy," Thomas whispered, ruffling the foal's mane. They were ready. It was time to begin riding. Ava had spoken often about this part of the journey. "Start slow, build trust, and never rush it," she always said. But the training up until this point had been a foundation, a quiet preparation for this pivotal moment. Thomas felt ready, and he believed Chance was, too. The saddle was waiting in the barn. It wasn't new. It had been used, well worn by another horse Thomas had trained years ago. He had taken good care of it, oiled the leather, cleaned it regularly. He'd never expected to use it on Chance, but now it felt like the right moment. "Let's do this," Thomas muttered to himself. He walked into the barn, pulling the saddle and the bridle down from their hooks. Chance stood in the doorway, watching him, his expression calm but expectant. "You ready for this?" Thomas asked as he approached. He held out the saddle. Chance sniffed it, then nudged it with his nose, almost as though he were testing it. Curious, but not fearful. Thomas smiled and gently placed the saddle on the foal's back. He did it slowly, taking his time, making sure the straps didn't catch or pinch. Next came the bridle. Chance stood still, his head held high, trusting but uncertain. The metal bit felt cold in Thomas's hands as he gently slipped it over the foal's head. "There we go," he said softly, adjusting the bridle to fit snugly but comfortably. Chance shook his head, but Thomas remained calm. He gently ran his hand down the foal's neck, reassuring him. "You're doing great," he said, voice low and steady. The next step was mounting. Thomas had watched videos, read articles, and asked Ava countless questions. He knew the importance of the first few rides, how the foal would react, and how crucial it was to maintain control without being too forceful. He led Chance to the mounting block, where the foal paused, flicking his ears back and forth. Thomas placed his hand on Chance's shoulder, giving a gentle squeeze before stepping up. Chance shifted, but didn't pull away. Taking a deep breath, Thomas swung his leg over the foal's back. For a moment, they were both still. Thomas felt the weight of Chance beneath him, the muscles shifting, the breath steady. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Chance took a slow step forward. Thomas kept his balance, gripping the reins lightly, feeling the connection between them. He didn't urge the foal forward. He simply let him walk. The first few steps were awkward, both of them adjusting, finding their rhythm. Chance's movements were hesitant at first, but soon the foal found his stride, his back rising and falling with each step. Thomas was acutely aware of every movement, every shift in balance, and he could feel the foal's cautious trust. "Good boy," Thomas said again, his voice barely more than a whisper. They walked around the pasture in slow, deliberate circles. There was no rush, no pressure, just trust, slowly being built one step at a time. Thomas focused on staying relaxed, keeping his body loose and responsive to Chance's movements. He wanted to be as much of a leader as a partner, calm, steady, and always present. As the minutes passed, Chance began to move, with more confidence. The foal's gait grew smoother, more even, and with each turn, Thomas felt his connection with him deepen. He didn't want to force this. It was all about timing. The bond they had developed in the past few weeks had led them here, but it was still fragile. Every moment was important. After an hour, Thomas gently steered Chance back toward the barn. They'd made it. Their first ride. And it had gone better than he'd hoped. "You did great," Thomas whispered as he slid off Chance's back and removed the saddle. The foal stood still, his body warm from the exercise, but his breathing steady. He was learning to trust, learning that he could be led, but also that he could lead in return. But Thomas knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. This was just the beginning. The next steps would be even harder, longer rides, more obstacles, challenges they hadn't yet faced. But for now, Thomas allowed himself to feel the pride and the calm that came with the first success. They'd done it together, and they were ready for whatever came next. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the farm as Thomas stood by the fence, watching Chance graze in the late afternoon light. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind, filled with challenges, but also victories, big and small. The foal had transformed before his eyes, not just in strength and skill, but in character. They had forged a bond, a partnership, not just of trainer and horse, but of friends. Every day, they grew together. Thomas had learned as much from Chance as he had taught him, maybe more. And now, as he watched the foal move with grace, his muscles strong and his movements fluid, Thomas could sense that their journey wasn't just about getting from one point to another. It was about the journey itself. Chance had come to him broken, abandoned by the storm, a shadow of a creature. But now he stood, fully formed, strong and confident. A partner. Thomas didn't have to look at him with pity anymore. Instead, he looked at him with a deep, profound respect. That night, after a simple meal and a quiet evening in the barn, Thomas returned to the pasture. He had thought about it for a long time. The next step. What would it look like for Chance and him, now that they had made it this far? He reached the gate and stood there for a moment, just watching Chance, who had noticed him from the other side of the field. The foal lifted his head, ears forward, and trotted over, his hooves digging into the soft earth, the power in his movement undeniable. "Well, partner," Thomas whispered, feeling the weight of the word. "You ready for this?" Chance stopped in front of him, standing tall, his eyes steady, almost as if he was waiting for a signal. The bond was unmistakable now. Without a word, Thomas opened the gate and stepped back. He didn't need to say anything else. Chance, after a brief moment of consideration, took the first step beyond the fence. He walked out onto the open pasture, his head high, looking at the world with a new sense of purpose. Thomas watched him go, but he didn't feel anxiety. He felt something else, a quiet sense of peace, knowing that this was the right time. Thomas followed at a distance, letting Chance set the pace. They moved together in sync, across fields that stretched out before them, the world wide and full of possibility. For the first time, Thomas realized he didn't need to lead. He didn't need to control. Chance knew where he was going. They were in this together, walking side by side, with no fences, no boundaries, just trust. As they walked into the distance, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the land, Thomas whispered to the wind, "I don't know what's next, but I know we'll face it together." In that moment, Thomas knew that no matter where life took them, whether it was through more storms or open fields, they would always have this bond. A bond forged in the quiet hours of training, in the struggles and victories, and in the moments of stillness where they both grew stronger. The future was theirs to shape, and together they would face it all. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas felt sure that the journey was just beginning.